spiritual evolution is the philosophical, theological, esoteric spiritual idea that nature and human beings or human culture evolve, either extending from the established cosmological pattern, or in accordance with certain pre-established potentials. The phrase spiritual evolution can occur in the context of higher evolution, a term used to differentiate psychological, mental, or spiritual evolution from the lower, or biological evolution of physical form. The concept of spiritual evolution is also complemented by the idea of a creative impulse in human beings, known as epigenesis. Within this broad definition, theories of spiritual evolution are very diverse. They may be cosmological, personal, or both. They can be holistic, idealist, and non-dual. One can regard all of them as teleological to a greater or lesser degree. Philosophers, scientists, and educators who have proposed theories of spiritual evolution include Schelling, Hegel, Carl Jung, Max Dhe Acuto N. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Henry Bergson, Rudolf Steiner, Sri Aurobindo, Jean Gebser, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Owen Barfield, Arthur M. Young, Edward Haskell, E. F. Schumacher, Eric Jansch, Claire W. Graves, Alfred North Whitehead, Terence McKenna, P. R. Sarkar. As of 2015, William Irwin Thompson, Victor Schumann, Ken Wilber, and Brian Swimmer work in this field. Precursors to the idea, the cyclic cosmos. Misha Eliade has suggested that in many pre-modern cultures one finds the concept of the fall and their nostalgia for paradise. However, for those cultures that have a cyclic cosmology, the concept of a progressive deterioration of the universe might be balanced by a corresponding ascent to more spiritual stages and a return to paradisical conditions. This is what one finds in Buddhist and especially Jain cosmologies. Emanation. Many pre-modern cosmologies and esoteric systems of thought are based on an emanationist view of reality. If the cyclic view is temporal, then emanation is a non-temporal precursor to the theory of spiritual evolution. According to this paradigm, creation proceeds as an outpouring or even a transformation in the original absolute Godhead. The supreme light of consciousness descends through a series of stages, gradations, worlds or hypostases, becoming progressively more material and embodied, before finally turning around to return to the One, retracing its steps through spiritual knowledge, contemplation and ascent. A supreme example of this form of thinking is the Neoplatonism of Plotinus and his successors. Other examples and interpretations might be found in the Hindu sect of Kashmir, Shaivism and Tantra in general, Gnosticism, Sufism, and Kabbalah. The Hindu idea of the chakras might also be considered here as the microcosmic counterpart of macrocosmic involution and evolution. The yogi raises the Kundalini, a life force, through and thus transcends each chakra in turn, until he reaches the crown chakra and liberation. Samkhya, an early example of the doctrine of spiritual evolution, is found in Samkhya, one of the 6 systems of Hindu philosophy, that goes back more than 2,500 years. Unlike most types of classic Hinduism, the traditional Samkhyan philosophy is atheistic and dualistic. Pure spirit comes into proximity with Prakriti, disturbing its equilibrium. As a result, the original root Prakriti undergoes a series of progressive transformations or unfoldings, in the form of successive essences called tattvas. The most subtle tattvas emerge first, then progressively grow to ones, each in a particular order, and finally the elements and the organs of sense. The goal of evolution, however, is paradoxically the release of Purusha and the return to the unmanifest condition. Hence everything is tending towards the goal of spiritual quiescence. The Great Chain of Being. The concept of the Great Chain of Being developed by Plato and Aristotle, whose ideas were taken up and synthesized by Plotinus. Plotinus in turn heavily influenced Augustine's theology, and from there Aquinas and the scholastics. The Great Chain of Being was an important theme in Renaissance and Elizabethan thought, had an under-acknowledged influence on the shaping of the ideas of the Enlightenment, and played a large part in the worldview of 18th century Europe, and while essentially a static worldview, by the 18th and early 19th century it had been temporalized by the concept of the soul ascending or progressing spiritually through the successive rungs or stages, and thus growing or evolving closer to God. It also had at this time an impact on theories of biological evolution. E.F. Schumacher, author of Small is Beautiful, has recently proposed a sort of simplified great chain of being, based on the idea of four kingdoms. Schumacher rejects modernist and scientific themes, his approach recalling the universalist orientation of writers like Houston Smith, and quite likely contributing to Ken Wilber's holonomic hierarchy or great nest of being. Buddhism. The concept of spiritual evolution has been taught in Buddhism. William Sturgis Bigelow, a physician and Buddhist, attempted to merge biology with spirituality. He accepted the existence of both material and spiritual realms, and many of his ideas were discussed in his book Buddhism and Immortality. Bigelow used the concept of natural selection as a mechanism for evolution. According to the author, spiritual evolution involves an individual emerging from unconditioned consciousness and moving up the scale of evolution guided by natural selection. Then the individual moves to a level of celestial experience, and finally is able to return to the unconditioned consciousness from which all things emerge. Bigelow accepted both material and spiritual evolution, and he also believed that Buddhism and science were compatible. Albert Lowe is Zen master and author of The Origin of Human Nature. His Zen Buddhist looks at evolution opposes neo-Darwinism and the selfish gene, as he claims they are materialistic. He also opposes creationism for being dogmatic and instead advocates spiritual evolution. In Vajrayana, spiritual evolution is equivalent with the development of the three bodies of Trikaya. Occult concepts. Theories of spiritual evolution are important in many occult and esoteric teachings, which emphasize the progression and development of the individual either after death or through successive reincarnations. Spiritualists reacted with uncertainty to the theories of evolution in the late 19th and early 20th century. Broadly speaking, the concept of evolution fit the spiritualist thought of the progressive development of humanity. At the same time, however, a belief in the animal origins of man threatened the foundation of the immortality of the spirit. For if man had not been created, it was scarcely plausible that he would be specially endowed with a spirit. This led to spiritualists embracing spiritual evolution. In the 19th century, Anglo-American spiritualist ideas emphasized the progression of the soul after death to higher states of existence, in contrast to Spiritism, which admits to reincarnation. Spiritualism taught that after death, spirits progress to new spheres of existence. According to this idea, evolution occurred in the spirit world at a rate more rapid and under conditions more favorable to growth than encountered on Earth. The biologist and spiritualist Alfred Russel Wallace believed that qualitative novelties could arise through the process of spiritual evolution, in particular, the phenomena of life and mind. Wallace attributed these novelties to a supernatural agency, Later in his life, Waller was an advocate of spiritualism and believed in an immaterial origin for the higher mental faculties of humans. He believed that evolution suggested the universe had a purpose, and that certain aspects of living organisms are not explainable in terms of purely materialistic processes. In a 1909 magazine article entitled The World of Life, which he later expanded into a book of the same name, Wallace argued in his 1911 book World of Life for a spiritual approach to evolution and described evolution as creative power, directive mind and ultimate purpose. Wallace believed natural selection could not explain intelligence and morality in the human beings, so suggested that non-material spiritual forces accounted for these. Wallace believed the spiritual nature of man could not have come about by natural selection alone. The origins of the spiritual nature must originate in the unseen universe of spirit. Robert Broom, in his book The Coming of Man, Was It Accident or Design?, claimed that spiritual agencies had guided evolution as animals and plants were too complex to have arisen by chance. According to Broom, there were at least two different kinds of spiritual forces, and psychics are capable of seeing them. Broom claimed there was a plan and purpose in evolution, and that the origin of Homo sapiens is the ultimate purpose behind evolution. According to Broom, much of evolution looks as if it had been planned to result in man, and in other animals and plants, to make the world a suitable place for him to dwell in. The Anglo-American position recalls 18th-century concepts regarding the temporalization of the great chain of being. Spiritual evolution, rather than being a physical process, is based on the idea of realms or stages through which the soul or spirit passes in a non-temporal, qualitative way. This is still an important part of some spiritualist ideas today, and is similar to some mainline Protestant Christian beliefs, according to which after death the person goes to Summerland. Theosophical conceptions. Theosophy presents a more sophisticated and complex cosmology than spiritualism, although coming out of the same general milieu. H.P. Blavatsky developed a highly original cosmology, according to which the human race passes through a number of root races, beginning with the huge ethereal and mindless Polarian of first root race, through the Lemurian, Atlantean and our present Aryan fifth race. This will give rise to a future, post-Aryan sixth root race of highly spiritual and enlightened beings that will arise in Baja California in the 28th century, and an even more sublime seventh root race, before ascending to totally superhuman and cosmic states of existence. Blavatsky's ideas were further developed by her successors, such as C. W. Ledbetter, Rudolf Steiner, Alice Bailey, Benjamin Creme, and Victor Schumann, each of whom went into huge detail in constructing Baroque cycles of rants, races, and subraces. Schumann elaborated on the theosophical conceptions of spiritual evolution. He proposed a definition and classification of Homo spiritualis, the sixth root race, consisting of 8 subraces: HS0 Anabiosis spiritualis, HS1 Scientella spiritualis, HS2 Aurora spiritualis, HS3 Ascensus spiritualis, HS4 Vocatus spiritualis, HS5 Illuminatio spiritualis, S6 Creatio spiritualis, and HS7 Servitus spiritualis. Although including elements of the science of her day as well as both Eastern and Western esoteric thought, Blavatsky rejected the Darwinian idea that man evolved from apes, and most subsequent esotericists followed this lead. Darwinism, with its explanation of evolution through material factors like natural natural selection and random mutation, does not sit well with many spiritual evolutionists, for whom evolution is initiated or guided by metaphysical principles or is tending towards a final spiritual or divine state. It is believed by theosophists that humans are evolving spiritually through a series of esoteric initiations, and in the future humans will become esoteric masters themselves as the souls gradually rise upward through the spiritual hierarchy over the course of eons as they reincarnate. Despite this, recent theosophists and anthroposophists have tried to incorporate the facts of geology and paleontology into the cosmology and spiritual evolution. Some have attempted to equate Lemuria with Gondwanaland, for example. Today all these ideas have little influence outside the specialized followings, but for a time theosophical concepts were immensely influential. Theosophy-like teachings also continue today in a group of religions based on theosophy called the Ascended Master Teachings, theurgy. Theurgy has a clear relationship to Neoplatonism and Kabbalah and contains the concept of spiritual evolution and ultimately unification with God or the Godhead at its core. Theurgy is considered by many to be another term for high magic and is known to have influenced the members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, many of whom considered the order to be theurgic in nature. Aleister Crowley also considered his Thelemic system of magical philosophy to be a theurgic tradition, as it emphasized the Great Work, which is essentially another form of spiritual evolution. The Great Work is believed to result in communication with one's personal angel or higher self. Epigenesis. Epigenesis is the philosophical, theological, esoteric idea that since the mind was given to the human being, it is the original creative impulse. Epigenesis, which has been the cause of all of mankind's development. According to spiritual evolution, humans build upon that which has already been created, but add new elements because of the activity of the spirit. Humans have the capacity, therefore, to become creative intelligences, creators. For a human to fulfill this promise, his training should allow for the exercise of originality, which distinguishes creation from imitation. When epigenesis becomes inactive in the individual or even in a race, evolution ceases and degeneration commences. This concept is based on the Rosicrucian view of the world as a training school, which posits that while mistakes are made in life, humans often learn more from mistakes than successes. Suffering is considered as merely the result of error, and the impact of suffering on the consciousness causes humans to be active along other lines which are found to be good, in harmony with nature. Humans are seen as spirits attending the school of life for the purpose of unfolding latent spiritual power, developing themselves from impotence to omnipotence, reaching the stage of creative gods at the end of mankind's present evolution. Great Day of Manifestation. Evolution towards Godhead. A common vision. Sri Aurobindo and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin both describe a progression from inanimate matter to a future state of divine consciousness. Teilhard de Chardin refers to this as the omega point, and Sri Aurobindo as the supermind. Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard, who was a Jesuit paleontologist who played an important role in the discovery of Peking man, presented a teleological view of planetary and cosmic evolution, according to which the formation of atoms, molecules and inanimate matter is followed by the development of the biosphere and organic evolution, then the appearance of man and the noosphere as the total envelope of human thought. According to Teilhard, evolution does not cease here, but continues on to its culmination and unification in the omega point, which he identifies with Christ. Meher Baba's involution. Meher Baba has used the term involution to describe the inner journey of consciousness after transcending the physical or gross state up to the attainment of self-consciousness, or merging with God. According to Meher Baba, the consciousness of the soul in duality first goes through the long process of evolution of form, then, upon reaching the human form, consciousness enters the process of reincarnation, and finally reaches the process of involution, which culminates in God realization. Surat Yoga esoteric cosmology depicts the whole of creation as being emanated and arranged in a spiritually differentiated hierarchy, often referred to as eggs, regions, or planes. Typically, 8 spiritual levels are described above the physical plane, although names and subdivisions within these levels will vary to some extent by mission and master. The constitution of the individual is an exact replica of the macrocosm. Consequently, the microcosm consists of a number of bodies, each one suited to interact with its corresponding plane or region in the macrocosm. These bodies developed over the yugas through involution and evolution, including by karma and reincarnation in various states of consciousness, dynamic evolution through successive kingdoms. Arthur M. Young and Edward Haskell have each independently incorporated the findings of science into a larger theory of spiritual evolution, and extended the traditional human, animal, vegetable, and mineral categories with kingdoms representing photons, atoms and molecules. Arthur M. Young goes further in considering the human state as a subset of a larger kingdom of dominion, of which the 6th stage is represented, for example, by Christ and Buddha, and the 7th stage and even higher level of enlightenment to God realization. Moreover, both Haskell and Young present profound accounts of evolution through these kingdoms in terms of cybernetic principles. A more mainstream scientific presentation of this same idea is provided by Eric Jansch in his account of how self-organizing systems evolve and develop as a series of symmetry breaks through the sequence of matter, life and mind. Although abiding strictly by the understanding of science, Jansch arranges the various elements of cosmic, planetary, biological, psychological, and human evolution in a single overall framework of emergent evolution that may or may not be considered teleological. New Age ideas. New Age thought is strongly syncretic. A common theme is the evolution of the transcendence of the human, a collective planetary consciousness in a higher state, a higher vibratory level. David Spangler's communications speak of a new heaven and a new earth, while Christopher Hill's refers to the divinization of man. Jonathan Livingston Seagull narrated the idea of evolution in a fascinating fashion. James Redfield in his novel The Celestine Prophecy suggested that through experiencing a series of personal spiritual insights, humanity is becoming aware of the connection between our evolution and the divine. More recently in his book God and the Evolving Universe, The Next Step in Personal Evolution, co-written with Michael Murphy, he claims that humanity is on the verge of undergoing a change in consciousness. Integral theory and spiral dynamics, an interpretation of social and psychological development that could also be considered a theory of spiritual evolution, is spiral dynamics, based on the work of Claire W. Graves. More recently, the concept of spiritual evolution has been given a sort of respectability it has not had since the early 19th century through the work of Ken Wilber, in whose writings both the cosmological and the personal dimensions are described. In this integral philosophy, reality is said to consist of several realms or stages, including more than one of the following: the physical, the vital, the psychic, the causal, and the ultimate, through which the individual progressively evolves. Although this schema is derived in large part from Tibetan Buddhism, Wilber argues that these same levels of being are common to all wisdom teachings. Described simplistically, Wilber sees humans developing through several stages, including magic, mythic, pluralistic, and holistic mentalities. But he also sees cultures as developing through these stages. And, much like Hegel, he sees this development of individuals and cultures as the evolution of existence itself. Wilber has also teamed up with Don Beck to integrate spiral dynamics into his own integral philosophy, and vice versa. Spiral dynamics posits a series of stages through which humans' cultural development progresses, from a survival-based hunter-gatherer stage to a magical tribal agrarian stage to a city-building invading stage to a mythic religious empire stage to a rational scientific capitalist stage to a green holistic inclusive stage, and then ascending to a second tier where all the previous stages are contemplated and integrated, and a third, transpersonal tier where a spiritual unity or omega point is eventually reached, which all the other stages are struggling to embody. He feels that individuals in each of the memplexes stages can ascend to the peak of consciousness, these being the prophets, the visionaries and leaders of any region, age,